Greetings. I've been asked to continue on Primitive Baptist history. And in our first video, well, we just had audio for it, but on our first one we talked about the history of the old school Baptist up until the time of the division with John Clark in the 1850s. I want to concentrate on a little-known division, but before I call the Smoot division. But before I do, I want to mention a few things that also happened in between these two instances. And this will be a little tricky because there's very little documentation on these things that happened, other than some articles in the Signs of the Times and other periodicals. So you had the Beebe Baptist on one side and the Clark Baptist on the other. Doctrinally, there wasn't much difference, although the Clark Baptist accused Beebe and Tract of Arianism, which is a belief in a created Christ, and that the Trinity is not eternal, etc., etc. We could go on with that, but they also denied the eternal union of the elect with Jesus Christ, with Christ. They also believed, and we have to, and I hope we get to talk about this again, but they also believed that the same man that was born of the flesh was born again, or as they like to call it, regenerated. Now, the word regenerate is only used twice in the King James Version of the Bible, and if you look it up, neither time has anything to do with the new birth. So just take that as it will and study it, and I hope the Lord will give you insight on it. But that was the points of difference between the Clark Baptist and the Beebe Baptist. Notice I didn't mention predestination. Notice I didn't mention time salvation. It's because those two things didn't exist as a difference between them. The Clark Baptist did not believe, originally, the Clark Baptist did not believe in conditional time salvation. That theory hadn't been broached yet among them, although the seeds of it were there. Neither did they deny absolute predestination at that time, although the seeds of that was there as well. So mark this down, that there were problems, but they hadn't manifested themselves as they would later. Now, there were some little separations, mainly in the West. And by the West, I mean Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, maybe even Texas by this time, where people were having some local divisions and local troubles that did not spread nationally. In other words, they did not affect the Baptist. You can read in the Signs of the Times from that time period. We're talking in between probably 1865 to 1880, because, Beebe dies in 81. Tract dies in 66. There you go. The people are declaring different things. BB believes this. BB believes that. The science has gone off into this, that, and the other. And BB answers some of them in his editorial writings. So if you look at that, you'll find a lot of local things where he's being accused of different doctrines and accused of different things. And none of them are going to amount to a hill of beans nationally. A few little squabbly fights that go on locally amongst the Primitive Baptist. Until you get to the death of BB. So what happens? Elements amongst us that had laid dormant while BB was alive, because this is my take on looking back at the history and how things developed, because they knew that BB would jump in there and put the quietus, as it were, to their little plans. They decided they would go ahead and reunite the Clark Baptist and the BB Baptist. Now, brethren, there are instances amongst us where divisions came about through personalities rather than doctrine or practical issues that mattered in the overall scheme of things. And when we see brethren who believe the same doctrinally and who practice the same in their worship services, reuniting who were separated, it should be a time of rejoicing for us. And if it's not, there's something wrong with us. Predestinarian Baptists have enough enemies on the outside that we don't need to fight with each other. However, we don't need to reunite with our enemies. Am I calling conditionalist Primitive Baptists of today enemies? Yes. And Clark Baptists back then were too. But anyway, these people, these elders, they were men of prominence, most of them. They decided it would be a good thing to hook back up with the Clark Baptists who had historically been our enemies. BB hadn't been dead 10 years before this happened. Who were your leaders? Let's name some names. F.A. Chick, Silas Durand, John Green Eubanks, Elder Badger in Virginia, all these people. Now, these men were not unsound. My goodness. Elder Chick wrote one of the best articles on predestination you want to find. Durand had a debate, a written debate with Oliphant, one of the leaders among the Clark Baptists in the West. But they thought that reestablishing this fellowship and gaining numbers, and that has to be what it is, because I don't believe these men were completely unsound as far as doctrine goes. Was the right thing to do. Sylvester Hassel was another one. And just as an aside, if you read some of Sylvester Hassell's stuff in the Gospel Messenger, he seems to be more one with the Clark Baptist than with the Beebe Baptist, unlike his father, who was a close friend of Elder Beebe. Well, what happens? Well, my goodness, some people oppose them. And like usual, it's a minority. In Kentucky, where this started, the J.T. Moore, J.M. Demery, and few others stood against the reuniting with what in Kentucky they called the Means Baptist. And so the Licking Association, Thomas Dudley's old association, Ambrose Dudley's old association, said, we're not going to send messengers to any associations this year. We're just going to send minutes because we need to take care of some of this problem within our own ranks. Well, human nature being what it is, folks, when it came time for the Eastern associations, let's name them: Lexington, Roxbury, Delaware River, Delaware, Salisbury, Baltimore, Virginia Corresponding Meeting. Those are the ones that were normally back then called the Eastern Associations, because they were kind of, Virginia Corresponding was in the Northern Virginia area. From there north, those associations. Those ministers that had been at the Licking Association told it that, the Licking has decided not to send messengers to the Eastern Associations. Well, it was to none. No association. We're not going to send messengers to any. Oh, no. And so that got all kinds of people upset, naturally. And I've got to make an aside here. I hope y'all don't mind. But I have to. There's nothing wrong with brethren associating and churches associating. However, associations have, for the most part, been the ruin of the Baptist and the cause of more divisions than anything else among them. Problems that could have been handled between two churches get brought into an association, and it splits them wide open. Beebe was right in 1845 when the Warwick Association voted to dispense with their formal correspondence and dispense with their formal organization, and we will have a meeting for fellowship, preaching, prayer, and singing at the time of the Warwick Association, and the pastor of the church will be the moderator. And if there's any business that needs to be taken care of, the church can take care of it. And the rest of us are just there for the fellowship. That's what an association's supposed to be. Not some extracurricular, as it were, activity that's going to wind up splitting churches, dividing brethren. Good brethren. Divisions will come. We don't need to try to make and a couple of extra ones. The Bible tells us that, doesn't it? Must needs be that divisions come. Bless our hearts. The Lord will send division at the proper time. Well, that got carried into the associations. And in getting sent into the associations, it came up in the Virginia court. The actual cause of the division came about in the late 1880s. The division we're talking about now, the Smoot division. When, at the Virginia corresponding meeting, the churches of Occoquan and Quantico advised their messengers that if the association did not drop correspondence with the Juniata Association of Pennsylvania, then they were to withdraw. Now, why would they want to withdraw correspondence from the Juniata Association? Because one of their churches had left the association, joined the Clark Party, and then wanted to come back. Well, there were members of that church who had, according to the thought of the times, and maybe in actuality, been baptized in disorder. And I think there was even maybe talk of an ordination being in disorder because of the fact that it was done amongst the Clark/Means Baptist. And so a lot of the brethren were upset that the Juniata Association took that church back without any acknowledgments that they'd done wrong or anything. Just flat took them back. Well, the association refused to hear the case. Occoquan and Quantico churches withdrew. Both of them were served by Elder William Middleton Smoot. According to, now those of you who have been around a little while amongst the Primitive Baptists may remember that Elder Stanley Phillips published 3 volumes of the select writings of Elder W.M. Smoot. Elder Smoot was a zealous defender of the absolute predestination of all things and the eternal vital union between Christ and his people. He wrote 2 books, Reminiscences of the Baptist of Virginia. Elder Phillips reprinted it. The Contest of 1886 through 1889, which was about this division, went into a lot of detail, including the fact that the elders Chick and Durand in particular were ready to reopen correspondence with the Clark Party. And he quotes an article in there by T.S. Dalton, I believe, and he says that Dalton wrote the following: if we have to take in unlimited predestination and eternal children, that was their disparaging term for eternal vital union, it's best we stay separate because we'll all time be in a wrangle. Here 40 years, 45 years after the Clark division, they'd already determined that unlimited predestination, what we would call absolute predestination, was wrong. They'd already determined that eternal vital union, that was one of the things Clark was against, by the way. They kept the notion that it was wrong. And they were more consistent than our people. I say our because Chick and Durand were held in fellowship by the BB Baptists till their deaths. And I think they saw the error of their ways. I think. One can never be sure, but I think they did. But anyway, he said, best we stay separate people or else we'll always be in a wrangle. They knew. They knew they weren't one with us doctrinally. So, Elder Smoot and his people separated, withdrew from the association, threw the whole thing into a tumult. I'm here to tell you, if you read the accounts of it, it was something. And what's the first thing they did? Start another association. The whole problem was fostered and festered by associationalism. And they read start a new one. And did. Finally, another church, a minority number of the Frying Pan Old School Baptist Church came out and united with Elder Smoot as well. Well, there was Occoquan, Quantico, majority members of both of those. Frying Pan. And then finally they would constitute a church in the town of Occoquan called Beulah. Elder Smoot began publication of a periodical he called The Sectarian, after the text, as for this sect, it is everywhere spoken against. It's where Elder Phillips got his material, was from the sectarians. Now, when I first moved to Maryland, I had come across the Smoot division. And by the way, the two parties, the Smoot and the BB Baptist, stayed separate. I mean, they were as closed as anybody could get. They had correspondence with Baptists from Missouri, originally from Missouri and further west, all the way to Virginia. Associations in Indiana and Kentucky and Missouri, Kansas. Some of the names that are in there were alive when I come amongst the Baptists, or had just died recently when I come amongst the Baptists. And by the Baptist, I mean the old school predestinarian Baptist. Or you recognize them. Recognize the names. So what am I saying here? That he had a correspondence, and I say that because, he was the ramrod, and he was right. So when I moved east, I had one little box of books with me, because I moved in the 76 Nova, and all it could hold was clothes and a few books and, a couple other things. But once I got settled, once I got to working, I went over to Occoquan, Virginia, where Elder Smoot lived, and talked to people who knew him. And I went down to Quantico. At the time the Occoquan church at Oak Grove, the building was still standing. It was in terrible disrepair, but it was standing. People still talked bad about Elder Smoot. He died in the 30s. And in the 80s, 50 years after his demise, people were still telling how awful he was and what stories they told. And some people really liked him. Here's a story about him that's not in any book or any history. He co-founded a bank in Occoquan. The way I got it was with 2 other men. And the person that told me that, Elder Smoot, loaned them the money to start their first business, which was a pharmacy in Occoquan. She said, "Do you know about Elder Smoot and the bank problem?" I said, "No, I never heard of a bank problem." She said, "Yes, Elder Smoot and a couple of men, they got him to go in with them and start a bank. Well, it was doing pretty well. And those 2 absconded with the funds. They left. Elder Smoot was a resident of Occoquan. Lived right outside town in a home he called Mount High. Called it the Old Tan Yard. He made good every deposit out of his own pocket. That's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of man he was. She said, yes. Oh, Elder Smoot never drove. This same lady said, yes. He never drove a car, you know. She said, yes, occasionally we would take him to his meetings. She said, you know, he never asked us to stay. I thought to myself, well, maybe he thought if you were interested, you'd ask him. And then she told me, she said, yeah, we'd take him to meetings, then we'd go to the Methodist church. Well, he knew they were Methodist. Evidently didn't care to talk about it. There was a business in town called the Lynn Company. One of the names that was a correspondent to the sectarian was Janie Lynn. I met her granddaughter. Janie Lynn raised her. She remembered going to the meetings at Occoquan and Beulah and around with her grandmother. To show you how it had effect on her, she thought the conditionalists down there were the same as the Smoot Baptist. So I talked to their deacon at her request, and my. Didn't believe nothing like the old Baptists do. Didn't believe like anything. The last member of any of the Smoot churches was Susie Hickson, who lived across the street just about from the Beulah Meeting House. The Beulah Meeting House is gone now. There's still a little cemetery down in the town of Occoquan where it was, and a marker. And many of the historic older homes in Occoquan are marked, and that's how I know that was Susie Hickson's house. I might as well be real honest and say that some people in the area accused him, Elder Smoot, and Susie Hickson of having an affair. At this late date, I don't think we'll ever know if it's true. I like to think it wasn't, that it was just talk and gossip, because Susie Hickson did help with the sectarian. And Elder Smoot's wife was named Susie as well. One more thing of a personal nature before we talk about doctrine a little bit more about Elder Smoot is if you go online and look him up, Elder W.M. Smoot, Elder William Middleton Smoot, and you do a Google search, you're going to find something on there that says that, yes, that church stood empty because Elder Smoot on his deathbed said nobody's to preach there until I come back and preach. Now, brethren, I'm going to tell you, based on what I know, that's a lie. That's an absolute lie. Because I talked to the man that found that Elder Smoot had died. You see, he had come to town for a couple of days. And people got worried about him. So they said, Arthur Carter, that was his name. He lived in Manassas, died there. That's where I met him. Said, go see if anything's the matter with Elder Smoot. He did. Said he found him sitting in the kitchen, looking like he was asleep, with his feet on the stove and the Bible in his lap. Elder Smoot couldn't have said anything on his deathbed. Nobody knew he was going to die. He didn't know. They didn't know. He died there alone and seemingly in peace. Elder Smoot contended for the correct doctrine. I got my copy of Elder Smoot's book. I was trying to tell this a while ago. When I moved east from Oklahoma, I had a copy of that book. It was a gift to me from a very precious brother who had gotten the book as a gift from Elder Smoot himself. And I'd read it 3 or 4 times in 3 or 4 months. And I went to see that brother on my way to Maryland, and I said, I got to know, what do you really think of this, of Elder Smoot? He said, brother, he had the correct doctrine. That doctrine was right. He said, I think he was wrong to have divided like he did. The older I get, the more I agree with that. I used to think, no, he was right. You know, let's get in there. Let's just tear up Ned and see how it goes. But no, he could have waited. He could have given the brethren time to consider, but he didn't. And so all of those old churches died out here or in Virginia. And yes, there was one in West Virginia, in Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas. What doctrine did they divide over? Primarily over the eternal vital union of Christ and his people. Take these 3 words, eternal. Never a time when it wasn't. Existing in eternity. Existing before time began. Vital. You know, we tend to use the word vital just to mean something that's necessary, something that's, you know, that's a vital doctrine. You know, absolute predestination, vital doctrine. Means living. Eternal life, union, unity, bringing together. You know how it was described? And if you go back, you know, you might say, well, brother, there's no eternal vital union in them old confessions, a lot of them. Listen. Eternal, personal election in Christ. Gets rid of 2 things. Gets rid of an election out of Adam's fallen race. This is what's called the infralapsarian scheme, or the infralapsarian doctrine. God looked and decided he'd create. And Adam fell, and he chose a people to himself. Based on the fact they were Adamic sinners. Now there's the supralapsarian scheme. And the supralapsarian scheme says this. God said, I'm going to create a people. And out of those people I'm going to create, I love some. And I'm giving them, I'm choosing them now. I'm not just choosing Adam at them. He hadn't even considered the fall. But personally, he chose a people, and by personally, I mean individually. He didn't just grab a lump and said, all right, anybody that's in here, that's the ones I'm choosing. No. Our God deals in specifics. Specifics. He chose a people. He gave them to his son and gave them to him as his seed. See? They're an eternal seed. They're an eternal bride. This is what was opposed by Clark, and unfortunately by some of the people with which historically we've been associated with. That God chose a people out of Adam's fallen race. God had to wait and see what Adam would do and said, well, I'll give a remedy to some of them. No, 1,000 times no. Our God doesn't react, our God acts. Oh my, now I've started trying to preach when this is supposed to be history. Brethren, things like that just happen sometimes. And it's not because I wanted it to happen, but because God willed it to happen. But let's go back to that Smoot division just for a minute. It was really a bigger deal than what we know about today. At the time, it was a bigger deal. But our people, signs of the times people, Zion's landmark people, they pushed it aside because a lot of them didn't want the congregations to know that they didn't believe in eternal union. Because it's a truth, a sad truth. A lot of times the congregations are sounder than the preachers. Well, things rocked along. The Smoot Baptists became forgotten until some of us dredged it up based on my getting that copy of Elder Smoot's first or last book. I could tell some other things that I heard about Elder Smoot, but I'm not going to, because the venom with which they went after him, like I say, 50 years after his death, the churches were all closed. And still, people tried to vilify the memory of a man who contended for the faith, a man who contended for the truth, a man who maybe went a little too far. You know, the brother that I was talking about who said, believe Smoot had the right document, he was wrong in dividing, said this: You know, if he'd have waited a little while, they might have divided with him. Think about that. If we just wait a little bit, be a little more patient, that would happen. I want to end this with another thing that kind of made me sad the first time I heard it. It makes me sad every time I think about it. Elder John D. Woods served the churches of the Virginia Corresponding Meeting for years. Mount Zion, Frying Pan, New Valley. He also served Baltimore and Black Rock. Those were the churches that Elder Smoot divided from. But when they come up here, Susie Hickson was still alive. She was in the nursing home. And they'd go see her. They'd talk, visit, discuss the scriptures. Elder Wood was a sound Baptist. I don't think you'd ever hear anyone, if they remember him, that would say Elder Wood was a soft Baptist. He wasn't. And Lord knows Sister Wood wasn't. Oh. But he asked Sister Susie Hickson as they were leaving one time. He told me this himself now. He said, "Would you like me to say a word of prayer before we go?" He said she looked at him and said, "No, I don't believe Elder Smoot would have wanted it." The churches have a respect for their overseers, elders, pastors, etc. Whatever terminology you want to use, that's fine. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. It's the right thing. But to think that someone who you just discussed doctrine with, and you didn't have a falling out with them, and you didn't say, "No, that ain't right," to say, "No, I want you to pray with me, because Elder so-and-so, whoever it is, might not have liked it." Dead man. You know, the Conditionalists have a hymn in their hymn book. It's lousy sentiment, or it's a lousy hymn when you get to it. But the first part of it's really nice. I think we can all agree with it. I need the prayers of those I love. Yeah, it's one of them kind of sentimental songs more than a doctrinal song. But you do, don't you? I do. I want the prayers of those I love. I want the prayers of my brethren. Brethren, let's not get so narrow that we'll exclude ourselves. Predestinarian Baptist, stand up. Stand up. Stand on the scriptures. Stand on the truth. And let's hope we can come together in the glory and the power and in the reasonableness of Jesus Christ. You know, he's only reasonable to us. He's totally unreasonable to the world. Only those who have been taught by him know. Well, I'm afraid I've done more preaching than history. If I have, I hope you brethren will forgive me. We'll get back to this, if the Lord wills, and talk about the division of around 1900. And that marvelous thing called the Fulton Convention and its little baby the Fulton Confession. Hope the Lord will bless you.